everybody, and welcome to Anteli month number 9. Now for this block we are going to need fabrics F2 plus the leftover 1.5 inch strip from month number 7. We're going to need F3, and there will be some of this left over that we'll save for month number 10. We need F5 and the leftover strip from month number 7 of F5, the 1.5 inch strip. And we need fabric F6. So gather those fabrics and we'll get started on the block. Before we get to the cutting, you will also need to gather your instructions for month number 4, and we're going to follow those instructions for step number 1 to 6, and then we are going to switch to month number 9 and we're going to follow those instructions starting at step number 7. So yes, we have been there, done that with this block. The difference is going to be the placement of the fabrics, and with this particular block we are making 8 blocks exactly, well, not exactly the same. 8 blocks that look exactly the same, but we'll be pressing them a little bit differently. So we need 2 pressed like this and 6 pressed like this. So it's not anything that we haven't already done in month numbers 4 and 7. And although it's somewhat the same, let's get that cutting started. So from fabric F2, we want 1 4-inch strip times width of fabric, 1 3-inch strip times width of fabric, and 1 1.5 inch strip times width of fabric, plus your leftover 1 1/2 inch strip from month number 7. Now from fabric F3, we want 1 4-inch strip, 1 3-inch strip, and we'll be saving the leftover of this 3-inch strip for month number 10. Now you'll be coming pretty much to the end of this fabric, but don't worry if you've only got a little bit left. All we use of this fabric now in the next month is about 7 inches times width of fabric, but we have lots of bits and pieces we can always pick from. So don't worry if you're getting a little bit low on this fabric, we still should be fine for the next month. From fabric number F5, we need 1 2.5 and 1 1.5, and then we will also need the leftovers, the leftover 1 1/2 inch strip from month number 7. Which I have right here. From F6, we need 2 3-inch strips, and that is all the main cutting done, and we're ready to start assembling the block. So if you are following along on the paper, we now want to switch over to month number 4, starting with step number 1. So in the video, I'm also going to switch over to month number 4, because the block is built exactly the same way until we get down to the final assembly of the block. So let's get started by grabbing our F5 2 1/2 inch strip, and we want to cut 8 2.5 inch squares from F number 5. And 8. And we're just going to pop those off to the side. Fold up the rest of that strip for now. And now we are ready to grab our 4-inch F2 and F3 strips. So there's our 4-inch F2 and our 4-inch F3. And we are going to cut these into 8 4x4 squares. So that'll be the first step. We're going to cut them 8 4x4 squares of this one and 8 4x4 squares of this one. If you're being careful and making sure that you have everything lined up, you can go ahead and cut them both at the same time. What you want to make sure is that you have your strips lined up right on top of one another, so that we're not getting inaccurate cuts. Now, of course, if you're uncomfortable doing this, just go ahead and cut the singles like we normally would. This is just if you're feeling a little bit adventurous and you want to try and save yourself a little bit of time. Go ahead and cut them at the same time. Because, of course, what we're going to do once we have these cut is we're going to make, well, sort of make half square triangles out of these. So we're going to pair them up when we're done anyway. And, of course, since they're batiks, you can't really tell the right or the wrong side. You just have to lay them on top of one another. I'm just going to let that drape over the edge of my cutting board here. sure I'm lined up. And continue cutting. And we want 8 pairs. Oopsie. Well, sometimes, you know what? When the strips don't quite line up like you want them to, I wonder if this is time saving or not. Two more. One more. Oops. Let's line that back up again. Okay, so there's our 8 squares. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our friction or whatever marking tool you have, and on the whiter one, because it's easier to see on F2, we are going to draw a line on both diagonals, like so. Okay, then what you're going to do is you're going to go to the sewing machine and you are going to sew a scant 1/4 inch on either side of both of these lines. So you're going to sew a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. Now we're going to trim these down later. So if you want to, you can do a scant 1/4 inch. If you do a full 1/4 inch, you'll just have less squaring up to do. But we got to square them all up anyway. Sometimes a scant 1/4 inch just gives you that little bit of extra wiggle room. But once you get this sewn, what you are not going to do is cut them on the lines right away, because we'll be cutting them here and then on the lines. So go ahead and grab all of these off to the sewing machine and let's sew a 1/4 inch on this side of the line, a 1/4 inch on this side of the line, a 1/4 inch here, and a 1/4 inch here. So off to the sewing machine. And back from the sewing machine. Now, I just chain pieced all mine because I do like chain piecing. It tends to be a little bit quicker. And normally, when I do something like this, I also like to go to the ironing board and kind of set my seams before I do any more cutting. But when your marking pen is heat erasable, that's a very bad idea. So we'll do a little bit more cutting and then we'll head to the ironing board. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab each of your squares and we are going to cut it this way on this direction, and then we're going to cut on the lines that we drew. So you want to line this up so that, let me just zoom in a smidge. There we go. We want the ruler to be lined up right with this mark here and this mark here. So it's going right through the center of that diagonal. And it should be 2 inches from the edge right through the center of that diagonal, and cut. And then we're going to flip each of these around and we want to do the same thing. We want to put the ruler so that it's right through the diagonal here, and of course it should be 2 inches because we started out with a 4-inch square. You're going to cut there, grab this one, line it up so I'm straight, I'm straight, I'm straight. I'm going right through the center, right here, and I'm going to cut. There we go. So let's zoom back out again. So now what you can do is you are going to cut on each of the drawn lines, so on the one diagonal. And you are going to end up with a whole bunch of cute little half square triangles like this. With 64 of these, and I want to press everything towards the darker fabric. So you'll press them all this way, and then we'll go ahead and square them all up. So do your cutting, off to the ironing board, give them a press, and then come on back and we'll square these up. And back from the ironing board, all 64 of these little dickens. So now what we're going to do is we're going to square them up. So as always, if you have your tucker trimmer, now's the time to grab your tucker trimmer. If you don't have a tucker trimmer, I will show you how to square them up in the next step. So with your trimmer, what we want to do is square these all up to 1 1/2 inch square. So if you got your trimmer, let's do the zoom thing. So if you have your trimmer, you're going to line this up, and I want to line it up my first time so that I'm bigger than the 1 1/2 and bigger than the 1 1/2, and I have this line right here lined up directly on the diagonal. And I'm going to go cut, cut, flip it around, line it up again directly on the diagonal, and this time I want to line up exactly on the 1 1/2 and the 1 1/2, and I'm going to go cut, cut. Okay, you're going to do that 64 times. So let me do it one more time, and then I will show you the other way to trim up if you don't have a tucker trimmer. Take your block, line it up so this line is on the diagonal. Make sure that you are bigger than 1 1/2 all the way around. Cut, cut. Just taking off nubbins this time. And flip it around, line up your diagonal, line up your 1 1/2, 1 1/2, this time directly on the 1 1/2 inch line, cut, cut. And do that 64 more times. Okay, if you do not have a tucker trimmer, we are going to grab one of my smaller rulers. Grab your 6 inch, your 4, 4 1/2 inch. I even have this little adorable 2 1/2 inch ruler, whatever ruler, as long as it's bigger than 1 1/2 inches square. And it has a diagonal going directly into the corner. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my triangle, or sorry, my half square triangle. I'm going to lay it down, line this diagonal up with the diagonal on the ruler. I'm going to make sure that I'm bigger than 1 1/2 inches all the way around. I'm going to cut and cut, flip it around, line up the diagonal. This time I want to line it up directly on the 1 1/2 and the 1 1/2. And I'm going to cut and cut. Let's do that again. Take your half square triangle, line it up on the diagonal. Make sure you're bigger than 1 1/2 inches. So I'm bigger than 1 1/2 inches here, I'm bigger than 1 1/2 inches here. I'm lined up on the diagonal. Cut, cut, flip it around, line it up on the diagonal again, and this time make sure you're lined up exactly on the 1 1/2, exactly on the 1 1/2. I'm lined up on the diagonal, and I go cut and cut. Okay. So continue until you have this whole pile of happiness right here looking like this little pile right there. So off we go. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take all these, and we need our F2 1 1/2 inch strip and our F5 1 1/2 inch strip. And we want to divide these into 2 piles of 32 each. So go ahead and separate all those out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put 32 of them on the F2 strip. And watch the orientation to make sure that you get this correct when you're sewing it on. You want to go ahead and sew it so that you're sewing with the darker triangle up towards the corner. Like this. And you're going to sew all of those on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to go ahead and do the same with the F5 strip, and you're going to sew 32 of them the exact same way, like so, so that you have the darker corner up and pointing to the right, the same as on here. So go ahead, divide these into 2 piles of 32, put 32 on the F2 strip, 32 on the F5 strip. So off to the sewing machine. And we are back. Now take any leftover strips, any of the 1 1/2 inch strips, and label those for month number 9, and you can put them away. So now we're going off to the ironing board, and we are going to press all of these towards the half square triangle. So go ahead and get that pressing done, and then we can cut these apart. And we're back from the ironing board. I'm going to zoom out just a smidge. So now we are ready to start cutting these apart. So grab your ruler, and what you want to do is we want to cut these into, of course, 1.5 inch slices, but you want to make sure that you are not getting them kind of kitty-wampus. So line your ruler up. Let's just move that a smidge. Line your ruler up so that you are straight on this line right here, which is the seam line between the two pieces. And you're right on the edge. And cut. Flip it around. Line it up to exactly 1 1/2 inches. And so I'm lined up here on the line. I'm lined up here at the 1 1/2. I'm also good on this side. And cut. So you'll do the same thing. Do this side first. Line it up here. Cut. Flip. Line it up on the 1 1/2. Make sure you're straight here. And cut. And do that with all of these 64 little pieces of fun. So we'll have 32 of these units right here when we're finished. And we will have 32 of the F2 fabric when we are done. And you're going to cut them exactly the same way. Make sure you're straight. Line up on the 1 1/2. Cut. And carry on doing all of that. And then we will come back and carry on putting the block together. Okay, there we go. We have all our little piles all squared up. So they should all, of course, be 1 1/2 wide. And now what we're going to do is make a 4 patch with those. So you're going to take the piece with F5 on one end and the piece with F2 on the other. We're going to put them together, and they should have opposing seams, right like that. And we're going to stitch them down here. So we're going to make that little 4 patch that it ends up looking just a little bit like a flower. So go ahead and you're going to make 32 of these little 4 patches. So off to the sewing machine. Now do watch the orientation. Make sure that you're putting them together like this with the points going in towards the center, as opposed to something like this or something like this. Make sure that they're lined up this way. Okay, now off to the sewing machine. And we are back from the sewing machine. Okay, so now what you're going to do is you're going to snip these apart. If you chain piece them, like I did, snip them apart. We're going to go to the ironing board. And what we want to do is press the seam allowances, this one going this way and this one going this way. Now we've done that before, where you just push them over like so, and what you're going to end up with is like a little tiny 4 patch in the center. Let's zoom in on that. So once you've pushed the seam allowances over, you have this little teeny tiny 4 patch right here. So let's show that again. We're going to go ahead and we're going to push this seam allowance towards this square and this seam allowance towards this one, and you end up with that nice flat little 4 patch in the center. And the reason we're doing this is just for added bulk, or to get rid of some of that bulk. If we were to just take these and push the seam allowance one way or the other, that is quite a bulky little center there. There's a lot of fabric in there. That's quite a few layers. But if we do this, where we just push them this way, that flattens out that center a lot, and it makes it just that much nicer of a block. So off to the ironing board, get all of these pressed, and then we're ready to move on to the next units. And here we are back from the ironing board with our 32 cute little tulip blocks. We're going to put them off to the side. So now we are going to grab our 3-inch F6 strips. And we are still on using month 4's directions. This is our last step for month 4, and then we are going to flip to month 7. So we're going to grab our 3-inch strip of F6. So we are going to cut this into 16 2 1/4 inch pairs. So we want to leave the 2 strips together again. We've done this for the other month. We leave them together, and it doesn't matter if they're right sides together or wrong sides together, as long as they are paired up this way. Let's get rid of that salvage. And now we're going to cut 16 3-inch by 2 1/4 inch sections and keep them paired. So we want 16 pairs. So continue going ahead and cutting 16 3 by 2 1/4 inch strips. And we will need both of our 3-inch strips to do this. So the important thing with this one, I mean, other than being accurate, of course, is to make sure that you keep your pairs together. Now that little guy that I just cut, he needs a little bit of a press. Let's grab the other strip and we will continue with the cutting. So I got 9 out of the 1 strip. So just need 5 more. 6 more actually, because I need 16 of them, don't I? And 1 more. There we go. We can take this, put it back in our pile. We are done with it for now. Okay, now we're going to subcut these. So if you have the V-block ruler, you're going to line the ruler up with the heavy dark line right there. Not the dashed line, the heavy dark line on the side of the triangle. It should be 2-inch finished down here, heavy line up there, and you're going to cut. And keep these paired up when you put them off to the side. So you'll just go ahead and you'll cut all of these just like that. And since we've done this several times, you know that we are making the sides for the V-block. Carry on with those. Now, if you don't have the V-block ruler, then probably your best bet is to make a template, just as we did in month number 4. So, same as we did last time, I've taken a sticky note and I have cut it into a 3 by 2 1/4 inch. And if you take your ruler and you measure over 3/8 of an inch right here at the top, and put a little tick. Take your ruler, measure 3/8 of an inch at the bottom, put a little tick like that, and then take your ruler and line up the ruler right on the tops of those little ticks. So right at the top here, like so. I'm going to cut that with my paper cutting rotary cutter. There. And that will give you a template for you to use that's the same size. So now you will just line that template up on the edge of your fabric, like so. Line your ruler up and cut. And you will continue doing that. Just make sure that you're lined up properly on the edges. Right there. Make sure you're completely lined up. and go ahead and cut. Now you just have to be careful that when you're cutting, you're not taking a little sliver of the template every time you cut. And remember, these blocks do end up being a little bit oversized, so we have a little bit of wiggle room. But continue using whatever method you have, whether you're using a template. Oh, that's a problem with a Post-it note, it's a little sticky. Use your template, or continue using your V-block ruler if you have it, and cut up all of your pairs. And once you have all those cut, we are now actually switching over to the instructions for month number 7. We are finished with month number 4's instructions. We were only following those to step number 6. So we're going to pick up now at step number 7 step number 7 for month 7. Okay, now we are ready to do our next cut. So we're going to take our 3-inch strips, and we're going to start by using the V-block ruler. Now I'll also show you how to do it if you don't have a V-block ruler, but we'll start with the V-block. So your very first cut, you're going to lay your strip out and lay it out single as opposed to laying it out double. You're going to lay the dashed line against the edge of your fabric and the 2-inch down here. So I've got my dashed line right here, my 2-inch right here, and I'm going to do cut. Then I'm going to take my strip and I'm going to flip it. I'm now going to line the ruler up so that this line that's right here is on the edge of my fabric, and the 2-inch finish line is right here down in the bottom. And I'm going to cut. Then I am going to flip my strip and I'm going to cut, lining up this line right down here perfectly, and this line, the 2-inch finished down at the bottom. Cut, flip, cut. Now you do need to be careful because it is easy to get it off just a little bit. So if you start to find out that you're not exactly lined up, where this is perfectly lined up and this is perfectly lined up, maybe you've done one cut that's just a little bit off, that's okay. Just go ahead and straighten out that cut. So let's just say I did one like this, where I'm a little bit off. It's okay, I can still fix that. I just need to straighten up that cut. Make sure that I am perfectly down in here. So on this particular one, we got to flip it just one more time. So I want to be lined up perfectly here, perfectly here. Take off that little extra nubbin that's incorrect. And then I will reset this angle right here by doing virtually the same thing. Grab that. Line up perfectly. So here I'm resetting the angle, lining up perfectly down here. You see that my angle's a little bit off there. It's okay. I cut that. I'll flip it around and I will fix my angle. There we go. So continue doing that until you have 16 of the triangles cut. Then we're going to cut strip F3 exactly the same way, and we need 16 of them. Now if you do not have your V-block ruler, you maybe still have your template from month number 4. That will work really well. But if you don't have your template from month number 4, we can make another one. You just want to start with a 3-inch square of paper. Fold it and be really fussy about your fold to make sure that all your lawn edges are lined up. Give it a good sharp crease. And then you're going to take your regular ruler. Make sure you're lined up right in the tip of that corner and right on the tip here. Grab your paper rotary cutter. Cut. And then you will use this as your template. Now this being a Post-it note, it's a wee bit sticky. So I don't know if that's going to help or hinder. Let's find out. Line that up. Put your template on your piece of fabric, and make sure you're lined up and that you're not taking any of the template off. Cut and cut. Maybe being a Post-it note, it does make it a little easier because it does stick to the fabric. And then flip your template around, line it up here, and cut. And you will continue doing that, where you will take your template, and instead of flipping the fabric, you're going to flip your template. So you'll cut, 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 and get that cutting done. So 16 of these, 16 of these. So finish that cutting and we can move on. Okay, so I bet you know what we're doing next. We are making some V blocks. So you're going to make 16 with these and 16 V blocks of these. So how we're going to do this, you're going to take your triangle and you're going to put one of the angles we cut earlier on the left and one on the right. So you have a block that looks like this. Now it's very easy to get confused and do something like this, or even get one right and one wrong. That is not the look we're going for. We're turning these more into a rectangle type block, which we will then trim up later. So what you'll do, you're going to go to the sewing machine and you're going to do one side, so the left hand side of all of these, and when you sew them together, these points here line up and you'll have a little bit of sticky outie down here at the bottom. So again, when you line those up, lines up perfectly here, a little bit of sticky outie down at the bottom. Sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and do that to all 32 units, 16 of these, 16 of these. So off to the sewing machine. All right, here we are back from the sewing machine. So now we're going to take all of these and we're going to go to the ironing board and we're going to press them towards the light blue shape. So press them towards the fabric, so away from the triangle in here. And then we will come back and we can attach the other side. So off to the ironing board. And back from the ironing board. There we go. Now I think I did this in month 4 too, where I got one out of all of these on the wrong side, and I don't know how I did that, but I did. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take, and it doesn't matter because I'm just going to put another one on this side. Now we're going to take the rest of these and we're going to join them up on this side. Now when we're laying this one down, the points will still meet up at the top, and don't worry so much about the bottom. But so join your points here and sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so we end up with a block that is going to look like this. Okay, and we're going to do that on all 16 of these and all 16 of these. So back to the sewing machine, and we are back again. So now we are going to go off to the ironing board and we're going to press all of these also towards the light blue. So go to the ironing board and press all of these this way towards the light blue, and then we are ready to trim these up. So off to the ironing board. All right, and we're back. And now we are ready to trim these up. So first, I'm going to show you using the V Block trimmer ruler from 180 Designs. And I do have to admit, it took me a few trials and errors to actually figure out the ruler. Not that the instructions aren't good, they just weren't computing. So here's what I figured out. So you take your block and you want the V to be up like this. Now, if you have nice contrasting thread, like this one where I can actually see my stitches on the back, I can do it from the back. Or if I don't have the contrasting thread where it's just too hard to see those stitches, I can do it from the front. So what we want to have these finish up at 2 inches, which means they are rough 2.5. And that's where I think my confusion came in using the ruler. So the first thing you want to do is use this part of the ruler right here, and you're going to line the V up on the 2 inch, which is the finished size of the block, not the rough size. So right in here, you'll see there's a little 2 right there. Again, I'm just going to zoom in. There we go. Let's scoot that up just a smidge. Okay, so you can see like the 2 right here, and I want that to line up with my V. And then I need to just cut and cut. And then I flip it around. And this time I'm paying attention to these marks up here, and I want to line this up on the 2.5 because now I'm back to my unfinished size or my rough size, 2.5. I want to line up along here 2.5, which is also my rough size. And then this little kind of X thing right here, I want that to be right at the tip of my block. And then I can cut and cut. And that squares me up to 2.5, where I still have my 1/4 inch here, which is probably the most important. So let's go through that one more time. You want to start with the V up, and I'm going to line the ruler up on the 2 inch. So I'm lining this right here. There's the 2. I'm lining that up with my V. Oopsie. Like so. And then I can go ahead and cut, flip this around. Now I'm lining it up on the 2.5, the 2.5, and I want that little X right there to be lined up on the top of my V. So then I will cut and cut. So once I figured it out, it was quite easy to trim these blocks down using the V-block trimmer. Like I say, it just took me a few minutes. So if you don't have the V-block trimmer, let's put that off to the side. Here's how you're going to trim these up to 2.5 inches. You want to lay it down on the mat so that it's square. And I want my first cut right here. I want to make sure that I have a 1/4 inch right from that edge. Scoot that up just a smidge. So I'm lying this down. So the 1/4 inch, I want to have a 1/4 inch from here to here. So lie that down there, and I'm just putting that little dot on my ruler, which is at my 1/4 inch. And I'm going to cut. Oops. Okay. Then I'm going to flip it this way, and I want to cut 2 1/2 inches. So now I'm lining it up nice and straight here on my 2.5. Cut. Okay, now we flip it up so that we're looking at the mountain, not the V. I want to be lined up straight here, and I've got my 2.5 inches in height. And now I want to line up right at the 1 1/4, because this is going to be finished 2.5. Sorry, that's the wrong terminology. It's going to be rough 2.5. So I'm straight. I've got the 1 1/4 dot right there at the top of my V, or in this case, at the top of my mountain. Cut that off. Flip it around. And now I want to make sure that I'm 2.5 inches. So I've got it lined up on the 2.5. I've got it lined up on the 2.5. And here, the 1 1/4 dot should be right at the very tip of my mountain. There. Excellent. So let's do that again. So you're going to start by lining this up, making sure we have a 1/4 inch from here to here. Now, you can do 2 steps in one. If I line up so that I am at the 1/4 here, and I'm 1 1/4 from the edge, I can do 2 cuts at once. But let's do it the other way first. I line up so that I'm 1/4 inch, and I'm going to cut. Then I flip it on the side. I line it up at 2 1/2 inches. Cut. Now I want to be 1 1/4. Right there. And I'm going to cut. It's got that little nibbin right there. And then flip it around one more time. 2.5 by 2.5. My little dot there is still at 1 1/4. Cut. Shall we do one more of those? Okay. Start by lining it up. I want to cut my 1/4 inch off the top, and I'm lining up with the base of my triangle. 1/4 inch, 1/4 from here to here. Trim, spin, line it up at 2.5, and cut. Spin one more time. Line it up here. Make sure I'm 2.5 on the top, 2.5 on the bottom. My 1 1/4 inch dot is right there at the tip of my triangle. Cut. Last flip. Line up on 2.5, 2.5, and just as a visual, my 1 1/4 should be right there on my tip. Like so. There we go. Now, one more time where we can do it in two cuts. So here I'm lining this up. I'm on my 1 1/4. So I'm 1/4 from the top. I'm 1 1/4 from the edge. Like so. And I can go cut, cut. Now I'm going to flip it around. I'm lining up on the 2.5, 2.5. My quarter is here. My 1 1/4 is there. And I can go cut, cut. There we go. So you can do it in 4 cuts. You could do it in 2 cuts. Or you could use your V-Block ruler. So go ahead and trim all of these down, both sets of them. Oops. Let's zoom out so you can see what I'm doing. So let's go ahead and do all of these and all of these, trimming them up to 2.5 by 2.5, and then we will be ready for the final assembly of this block. And we are back. Now we have all the components of our blocks made. Now you will notice that I did use quite a bit of month number 7's footage in the previous steps, mostly because nothing has really changed. The blocks go together exactly the same way, and let's be honest, it's a little bit faster for me to put a block together and do the work without having to stop and explain the steps. So now we are ready to assemble our blocks. Now when we're assembling these blocks, we're going to make 2 of this and 2 of this. Now the blocks are exactly the same, but the pressing is a little bit different. So we'll start with these 2 right here. So we're going to take 4 of these units. Oops. 1 of these. That's going to go in the middle. And then we are going to put this one and this one and this one and this one. So for these first 2 blocks, we are going to sew this row together and press the seams in towards the rec block. We're going to sew these 3 together and press the seams again towards the rec block. And then we'll sew these together and press the seams towards the rec block. So that'll be our first step. Sew these 3 together. We're going to make 2 of these. So off to the sewing machine. And I am back from the ironing board. So I have pressed these 2 seams towards the rec, these 2 seams here towards the rec, and these seams here towards the rec block. And now we're just going to sew those together like we do a normal block. And we're making a total of 2 of these. And here I am back from the ironing board. I have my 2 blocks here done. Now my final 2 seams, so these seams are pressed in towards the rec block, these seams out towards the rec block, these seams in towards the rec block, and then my final 2 seams, these here, are pressed down in towards the center block. So I've done that with 2 of them. So we'll take these 2 blocks and we're going to label them M. And we can put them away. We're done with that for this month. And now we just have our 6 N blocks to work on. Now the next blocks, we're making 6 of them, and they go together exactly the same way. We are just going to be pressing them a little bit differently. So instead of pressing all of this set towards the rec block, we are going to press them towards the corner blocks. So you're going to do exactly the same thing. So these 3 together, these 3 together, these 3 here together, but this time we're going to press these seams towards this block, these seams towards the center, these seams towards this block. And we're going to make 6 of these. So that's our next step to get these 6 blocks together. So off to the sewing machine. And here we are back from the ironing board again. So I have these seams going away from the rec block, so in this way. These seams going in towards the center. These seams here going out towards the tulip block in the corner. Then you're going to sew this together, and we are going to press these seams towards the rec block this way. So these seams, of course, are going this way. These 2 seams here are going to go this way and this way towards the rec block. So that is our next step, and of course we need 6 of those. So off to the sewing machine. There we go, back from the ironing board yet again, and we are done for another month. So you're going to take these 6, and we are going to label them N as in Nancy, put them off to the side, and that's it. We're done. I hope that you have enjoyed this month, and I look forward to next month. Bye for now. Happy sewing.